So, welcome everybody. I think we've got everybody in from the waiting room. I imagine one or two people may join us a little bit later on. I realise it's just getting to the end of the school day, so we may have some people joining us a bit later on. Inevitably my screen has gone blank at the opportune moment, but welcome. And to particularly welcome to this Decolonising the Discipline session. What does it mean to have a diverse curriculum too? We've had one of these already, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a sec. But we're focusing on schools and higher education and collaboration in English studies and modern foreign languages. So if you've not come along to any of our sessions before, a little bit of an explanation of who we are. Decolonising the Discipline is a collaborative initiative undertaken jointly by colleagues at the English Association, the Institute of English Studies, which is hosting this session today. Thank you. The University of East Anglia, Postcolonial Studies Association, and University English. We invite academics from across English studies and cognate areas in the UK to join us in building a network of decolonising practitioners through which we can gather and share experiences and ideas to effect practical change. So earlier in April of this year, we had a session which brought together educators from secondary and higher education to explore what it really means to have a diverse curriculum and what we might mean by decolonisation in that context. And this second session is now bringing together two decolonising initiatives led by practitioners in English studies and modern foreign languages to explore how schools and universities can collaborate on decolonising initiatives. And we've got four lovely speakers. And the way we're going to do things today, we're going to hear, I'll introduce them in a minute, but we'll hear first from Erin Girling-Knight, and then we'll hear from Jo Ford, Lisa Panford, and Ro Henry Grant. And we'll hear from them sort of back to back. Essentially, they're all going to talk for about 15, 20 minutes, so, sort of with Erin going first, and then Jo, Lisa, and Ro presenting together in the second half. And then we should have plenty of time at the end for discussion. You'll have noticed we're recording this, but we will simply record the talks. We won't record the Q&A at the end. So, please feel free at that. But, if you're happy, you can, that you're welcome to speak your mind, as it were, if you're concerned about that. So the recording will stop when we get to the Q&A. So, I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself. I'm Catherine Baxter. I'm a professor of English literature at Northumbria University, where I also lead our faculty's research and knowledge exchange. And I work with Claire Lees, who's on this call, Nicole King also on this call, Annie Sherritt on this call, and several other colleagues from across English studies on the Decolonising the Discipline initiative. So let me introduce our speakers. So first of all, Erin Girling-Knight is a subject standards leader in English for the Inspiration Trust. Erin has been teaching English since 2011 in secondary schools across East Anglia. And she's also involved in the East Anglian NIOT Inspiration Teacher Training Programme, delivering curriculum and pedagogy sessions to the next generation of English teachers. Erin led the Trust Decolonising English Resource Development Group in 2023 to 2024, and she's going to be presenting on the Trust decolonisation sessions and the resources produced. And after that, we'll hear from Jo and Lisa and Ro, and they join us as members of the Decolonising the MFL, the Modern Foreign Language Curriculum Specialist Interest Group for secondary schools, hosted by the Association for Language Learning, which facilitates dialogue between MFL specialists in schools, universities, and higher education, ITT institutions, and publishing to mobilise pedagogical advances in decolonised curriculum development and have positive practical impact on students in the secondary MFL classroom. So Ro is a PhD candidate whose research focuses on transnationalism, culture and race at the Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies. Her work explores the intersections of language, art, and social justice, critiquing dominant power structures and advocating for the creation of spaces that promote linguistic and cultural liberation, particularly for marginalised communities. And in this, she draws inspiration from luminaries such as Bell Hooks, Lola Olufemi, and the Combahee River Collective. Joe Ford is Senior Lecturer in French at the Institute for Languages, Cultures and Societies, and he specialises in post-colonial and comparative literatures from across the Francosphere and is co-convener with Emmanuel Santos of the Decolonising Languages Network, which works closely with members of the Association for Language Learning Decolonised Secondary MFL Special Interest Group. And finally, last but by no means least, Lisa Panford is Senior Lecturer and Course Leader of PGCE's Secondary Modern Languages programmes at St Mary's University in Twickenham. And she's an active member of St Mary's Race Equality Charter Self-Assessment Team, and her group were awarded the St Henry Walpole Prize for Teaching and Learning in 2021 for their innovative approach to promoting and strengthening equality, diversity and inclusion work with PGC students through the Diversity Cafe. So let me hand over to Erin and let's hear from you. I think you've got some slides for us, haven't you? So.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Hopefully you can all see that.
Yes, we can.
That off. Okay. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It's the first time I've been asked to speak at one of these events, so I'm absolutely thrilled that I get the opportunity to. It's a project that I'm personally very passionate about, so hopefully this will be interesting and I hope helpful. So I'm a subject standards leader. I work for the central team for Inspiration Trust, and we drive forward CPD in the trust. And in 23 to 24, I was in charge of the Decolonising the Curriculum CPD for the English teachers in the trust. And teachers became very passionate about this because we all felt it was our moral obligation to be presenting to the students in our class a diverse view of the text that they're studying, because our classrooms were becoming more diverse as years went on, and we found that it's increasing in East Anglia. We're having a more diverse range of students. Students' awareness had also started to develop. A lot of teachers in conversations had said that their students were commenting on the whiteness of their education and the male slant that their education was having. I had a group of Year 11 students who, whenever I handed out some of the core poetry for the GCSE, would say, "Oh, it's another dead white man." And that really was telling, that actually the students were noticing that we were delivering a very limited view of the curriculum. And even teachers were starting to question the white Eurocentric nature of the texts that they were teaching and wanted to develop more diverse readings of the text within the canon. And we teach a lot of Benjamin Zephaniah in our schools, and even Benjamin Zephaniah pointed out that actually we need to be, as educators, part of the undoing of this years of brainwashing. And teachers were extremely passionate about that. So moving forwards, the trust implemented CPD that looked at this idea of the wheel of power. We give power to what we showed the students, and unwittingly and through the curriculum, we were giving power to the Eurocentric white male view. Students were picking up on that, teachers were picking up on that. And we thought it was the perfect time to start developing our curriculum within the canon that we had by shifting the perspective within the texts we were teaching. At our trust, we have a shared Key Stage 3 curriculum. And as they move through the years, we build on the key concepts of love and power. And we wanted to explore that through a love of heritage, a love of culture, but also power in its different forms. The power that oppression can have over people, but also the power that celebrating your culture can have. In Year 7, we teach the Canterbury Tales, we teach A Midsummer Night's Dream, and we teach romantic poetry. Going into Year 8, we teach Oliver Twist, we teach Julius Caesar, and then we teach the sonnets. And going into Year 9, we teach Jane Eyre, we teach Animal Farm, and then the final text is the school's choice to teach. So the first thing we decided we wanted to do to begin diversifying and decolonizing was using PSHE time and reading for pleasure lessons to expand the canon. What we found was happening in schools is schools were teaching whatever they had whole class sets of books of in the cupboard. So routinely, you'd find it was, again, Eurocentric white writers. And we decided we wanted to expand that. We wanted that to be much more diverse. And these are just some of the texts that we started to implement. We decided to bring in 2 Akala novels, and we read Pigeon English, Black Flamingo, I Am Malala. And students engaged with this brilliantly. They were really excited about the texts that they were studying. And lots of students went on to read other texts off the back of these ones. We found that also it empowered teachers to have those conversations. Not only were the lessons happening in English, but they were happening in form time. So it allowed us to address diversification and decolonization outside of English as well. CPD sessions were delivered to form teachers so that they had the right vocabulary and were empowered to have these conversations with their students. And we saw not only students' engagement with diversity and decolonization increase, but students' buy-in with English also increased. We started in our first session with Dr. Mondal, who led us through decolonizing Jane Eyre. And for this particular topic, we decided to look at environmental determinism in relation to Jane Eyre, specifically in relation to Bertha Mason. We had to discuss with staff the idea of what environmental determinism is. Many staff hadn't had this input, so it was really valuable for them to have this session with Dr. Mondal. And we looked at the idea that actually human disposition, it was believed at the time, was dictated by where you came from. That even if you removed a person from that environment, they still carried those characteristics. Extremely racist thinking and racial characteristics will change when exposed to certain other environments. And we started to challenge that idea that that was extremely racist thinking held within the novel. And we looked specifically at Bertha Mason for this and the language used to describe her. Teachers were already teaching this. They were talking about the language used to describe Bertha Mason, but they weren't engaging with it in the most efficient way to decolonize it. So we decided to do that within the session. And we looked at the language used to describe her and the racial connotations around that. We looked at the environmental determination in that language. And in the second session, we guided teachers to produce, as a resource group, some of the resources that could be embedded in lessons. Moving forward, teachers now approach Bertha Mason very differently. Some of the resources that teachers produced were examples like this, and I hope you can see them. I apologize if they're very small because we had lots of them. Teachers started to actually address the ideas of political and social standing when it comes to someone like Bertha Mason, and started to have those conversations with their students. Teachers started to shift the perspective away from Rochester and Jane and on to Bertha Mason and how people may view her. Teachers brought in extracts from the Yellow Wallpaper and started to compare that with Bertha Mason and started to look at the more female view of the novel. And teachers started to engage in discussions with the students and guide those discussions around how Bertha may feel in that situation and actually who the real villain was. Teachers started to engage with the idea that actually Bertha is painted as the problem, but actually she's not the problem. Society is the problem. And the ideas that Rochester is suggesting are the real problem. Teachers now embed these in their lessons quite regularly and have these discussions with their students when it comes to Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre has become at the Trust one of the most popular modules with our students because we have started to shift that perspective away from the conventional and to take a more decolonising slant on it. The second session that we had was led by Dr. Will Rossiter, and he talked about decolonising the sonnet. And I think this was the most difficult session for the teachers because it challenged traditional beliefs of beauty at the time, because people did think in the staff base did start to think of the sonnet as a very white discipline, especially the older sonnets. So we started to challenge those ideas of beauty and whether the sonnet is just the old version or whether we can start to pull in the newer versions. And it changed the idea of whether the sonnet was purely a Eurocentric white discipline. As a result of that session, teachers were shown artwork of the time, and teachers were introduced to more modern sonnet writers. As a result of that session, teachers started to look at writers like Claude Mackay, Terence Hayes. As you can see from some of the resources here, teachers produced full lessons around some of Terence Hayes' sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. Teachers started to pull in different views of the sonnets. One of our teachers at the Hewitt Academy, who is hugely vital in decolonising the curriculum, she's fantastic, started to bring in a comic strip that took a completely different view of it. We started to talk about other sonnet writers like Claude Mackay, and this particular teacher here used Harlem Dancer. And we started to, again, shift the perspective. We started to move from the sonnet writer's perspective about the mistress to the mistress themselves. And again, this is something that is now embedded in the curriculum, and teachers do use this. And I think it empowered teachers to be able to introduce their own sonnets as well from writers that they liked from a more diverse range. And our final session was delivered by Dr. James Woods, and it was on decolonising Oliver Twist. This seemed to be the module that teachers were more keen and felt more empowered to decolonise, because we were already looking at challenging the presentation of Fagin in the novel. We even then started after the session, and thanks to Dr. James Woods, to challenge the happy ending. Can we actually celebrate Oliver's happy ending if he is now thriving off the plantation wealth he has inherited? Can we say there is a happy ending? And we started to challenge the role of women in the novel. The women in the novel are presented purely as ingenues and victims, or as servants. And as a result of those sessions, we again started to implement those discussions about Oliver inheriting wealth. Can it truly be a happy ending if he is benefiting off the suffering of others? And we started to question the writer's intentions. Can we say that it's fair that Dickens criticises the workhouses but not the West Indian plantations? Teachers even started to further develop their challenging of the anti-Semitic representation of Fagin, using Eliza Davis' letters to Dickens, where she herself challenges his presentation. And we started to look at the illustrations through time that have been in the more illustrated novels of Oliver Twist, and started to challenge those with the students. And students very quickly picked up on that it is a very unfair representation, that's a very loaded representation. And we even started to bring in other texts as well. So the teacher from the Hewitt that I mentioned previously started to bring in Beverly Nadeau novels as well, that we could start to compare with Oliver Twist. So students were getting a much wider diet of the things that were being shown off the back of the decolonisation, but we were also challenging some of those ideas and presenting to the students that the perspectives in the novel are not the only perspectives that we can look at. Students bought into this massively, and they were really, really enthusiastic about it. So much so that now those conversations naturally occur around other texts as well with our students. Going beyond our CPD sessions, it's had a lasting impact on teaching in the Trust. The Thetford Academy developed an entire module. So as I mentioned in Year 9, the final teaching topic in the summer term is completely school choice. And the Thetford Academy developed a complete module that looks at diverse texts, diverse ideas, decolonises ideas. And it's a really beautiful module, and the kids absolutely love it. It's completely debate-driven, so it's also building their oracy, and the conversations that you hear between the students are wonderful to hear. Teachers said off the back of the CPD they felt more confident to have those discussions about decolonising those canon texts. Oliver Twist and Jane Eyre and the sonnet resources are now available and used in all lessons throughout the Trust. And moving forward from that, a further bank of resources is being developed for teachers to use in the Key Stage 4 teaching as well. We've even started to further develop in schools our PSHE and reading programmes off the back of the CPD, because teachers felt empowered to make more choices. And more books have been added to the Reading for Pleasure and PSHE lessons. We're very lucky that we have a connection with Ashley Hickson Lovance, who has come in and presented his new books to the school and is working with groups of boys and girls to produce their own writing, their own decolonised writing. So we're extremely lucky that we have that, and we're extremely lucky that we have those connections with the UEA. In summary, this CPD that we have done around decolonising the curriculum, the work is most definitely not done. It is still ongoing, and it will forever be ongoing. But what we've managed to achieve off the back of that CPD is really promising moving forward. Teachers are engaging with it massively. Pupils absolutely adore it. And it's a project that the Inspiration Trust is going to keep at the forefront of their development moving forward through the years as we develop our curriculum and into any of the new governmental changes that come in. So thank you so much for having me, and I hope that's been interesting and helpful.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was just wonderful and so inspiring. Really, yeah, really great. I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions about this. Thank you so much. Right, and thank you also for keeping to time so beautifully. So we shall move on now, and we've got Jo and Ro and Lisa, and I think we've got until about 25 past. We've got a good half hour to hear from the three of you. So I'll hand over to you, and I know a couple of you have got slides, so I'll let you kind of take it in turns and take it away. Thank you.
So much, Catherine. I wonder if you could just confirm that you can see those slides.
Yes, we can, and we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. So it's just brilliant to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us into your space, into your subject discipline. I should introduce myself. My name's Lisa Panford, and probably I should start with a bit of a disclaimer, and that is around my positionality, right? I think that's a legitimate area for scrutiny here. I want to be completely transparent about the fact that decolonising languages education, issues of race and racism in languages education, for me, this work is both professional and personal. So I'm motivated by a conviction based not only on the sort of perennial reports that we have that tell us that our institutions and our own subject disciplines are racially discriminatory of our pupils, but I draw my own sets of educational experiences and professional experiences, and that's 15 years working as a secondary school language teacher and the past 5 as a teacher educator. I find that our subject discipline requires urgent intervention. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity to discuss that. I think initiatives like these, such as these ones, which seek to make spaces for collaborative learning and hopefully action, are essential for advancements in this area. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the discussions today. In relation to knowledge exchange between our two subjects, I'd like to begin by sharing this collaborative research paper that I was fortunate to be involved with, and that explores exactly this. So it's making spaces for collaborative action. And you'll see I've taken some of the vignettes from English here. And through this network, through my work with this network, I gained a deeper appreciation, and as Erin was speaking actually, of the ways that our two subjects mirror one another. But I think the process of collaborating on this paper really brought to the fore for me the understanding that decolonial anti-racist work necessarily involves collaboration. To quote the director of ILCS, a strategic coordinated response, right? And that's between teachers, students, other school level actors, within across departments, subject communities, between subject disciplines, universities, and other institutions and community organisations. So I will now share some of the work of our Decolonised Secondary Languages Special Interest Group. It's a mouthful, so I'll just call us SIG from now on. But before we get to sort of sharing our current work, I thought it might be funny to share that back in 2020, you know, at the inception of our group, when we were founded, it was to explore the very question that we have framing our discussions today. So it was myself and my colleague Melina Irvin, who was then a teacher based in Bristol, and we delivered a conference paper entitled "What Does an Anti-Racist Decolonised Curriculum in Modern Foreign Languages Look Like?" In that conference paper, we did say that we didn't know what one looked like because we hadn't seen one, but we highlighted what we found to be some of the failures of the current MFL curriculum provision. And that was the failures to meet the national curriculum's articulation of the purpose of studying a language. I've put a passage of that articulation of the purpose of studying a language up on the screen here. And you can see from this passage, I mean, the highlighting is mine and the linking with bell hooks is mine. But you can see this articulation it's hopeful and it's liberatory. And yeah, if you track it against hooks, it's transgressive. And we found that the current subject content was a divergence away from the national curriculum's articulation. The process of disentangling race and language teaching are really complex. There are a number of subject-specific dimensions which are at play here. So we could look at the stark underrepresentation of teachers of colour in our discipline. It's particularly stark in our discipline. I do know actually it's worse in English, but sorry, those are the statistics from the NFER. We have to reckon with our colonial legacies and the colonial legacies of the three main languages that are taught in schools in England. Even the name of our subject discipline, modern foreign, that confers paradigms of power and privilege that need to be unpacked, right? We could talk at length about the privileging of European and white cultural examples and literary texts, and in I suppose most recent years, the unrelenting focus on what has been coined by Ofsted as the pillars of progression in their phonics, vocabulary, and grammar, which effectively have had the impact of that is that that unrelenting focus has sidestepped the teaching of culture, and it's delegitimized anti-racist work and critical work. And Erin spoke amazingly about the critical work that is that her students are being compelled to engage with through this project. But that's being sidestepped by the unrelenting focus on phonics, vocabulary, and grammar currently. And yeah, I think many of these dimensions may sort of chime with what's happening in English. Another sort of complication or a barrier to advancements in decolonizing came in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, and the groundswell of really well-meaning interventions by languages teachers and teachers of all subject disciplines to decolonize the curriculum, but the sort of conflation of the notion of diversification and decolonization. I think there's like semantic confusion around those two terms, quite distinct. And we problematize this notion of diversification as an adequate response to persistent patterns of inequity as they show up in our institutions and systems. So we've found that it was inadequate to cling to sort of tokenistic representations and promoting diversity and inclusion in languages, celebrating diversity. It's all incredibly positive, but we problematize it because it it can become a way of talking about race and anti-racism without saying race and anti-racism, because it's more sanitized and positive. And while it's sort of well-intentioned, it's problematic because it means that we fail to address racism and the racism as it appears within our subject. If I look like I'm kind of if I look like I'm experiencing some discomfort, I am always. I think speaking about racism and exposing issues of racism is uncomfortable and unpopular in most places. And maybe I'm interested in English colleagues here, maybe it's extra uncomfortable in the field of languages education, because I think by nature it attracts people who have international experiences, willingness, passion for intercultural understanding, cultural insights. But that doesn't make our field or our practitioners devoid of the responsibility to examine how racism shows up within our discipline and our practice. I draw on the work of Kubota, who speaks really articulately about the process of self-awareness that's required in our discipline for advancements to happen. So self-awareness, I guess, is where our SIG comes in, right? Our SIG operates under the auspices of our National Professional Subject Association, and that's the ALL, the Association for Language Learning. We are comprised of practicing teachers, teacher educators, academics, researchers, representatives from awarding bodies, educational publishers, and we all transcribe to that transformatory promise articulated in the national curriculum, and find that urgent action is required. Urgent action is required, I should say, to identify and disrupt the racism as it appears within our own discipline. We've had a number of really exciting outputs as a collective, and I think Jo and Ro will speak to some of those shortly. And we're incredibly proud of our partnership with the Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies, and the work that we're developing to advance action in that area collaboratively. Before we come to that partnership, I will just share that one of our outputs has been this resource bank, and this is a free resource bank that we have published through Pearson. I should say authors have been paid for writing and having their work published here. For many of them, it's their first experience of publishing, and obviously it's important that we understand that this work is not a passion project or enrichment. This is work and it should be paid. And we've had brilliant support from Pearson with this series. Our resources here are sort of aimed to support teachers have told us that they're finding them useful in their lessons, but they were also designed so that pupils Key Stage 3 and 4 are able to access resources that speak to the contemporary issues of our multicultural, multilingual, contemporary world, and they can do that independently, so without their teachers. I can share a link to that resource bank if that's helpful. And I suppose what I wanted to say is fundamentally, I think our group recognized that resource development is it's a key strand here. And that teachers require support in the form of resources and updated textbooks. It's great to hear that so many textbooks are being reviewed with an EDI lens. But what's really required is policy intervention, right? And most recently, we've had the we've all had the curriculum and assessment review, and that's kind of sharpened our attentions in relation to policy. The SIG group have identified 3 priorities in terms of decolonising or anti-racist work, rather, in our discipline. In the first instance, it's about developing a racially literate languages teaching workforce, and I'm sure colleagues in the room will appreciate racial literacy should be a core element of teacher education, but it's not currently enshrined in any of our statutory frameworks. We require the government's endorsement of the anti-racism framework. I'll share a link round. I'm sure everybody's come across it by now, which is a huge resource. We require revisions to the Ofsted framework, in the inspection framework in line with that, to line up with that. And we require a targeted subject-specific racial literacy training, because as I've tried to express, there are sort of unique barriers and blind spots within each subject discipline. And so we require a subject specific interrogation in order to make advancements. The other areas, obviously, the formal curriculum. So we're talking to the subject content. So one thing that for example, we have in GCSE, we have prescriptive set lists of vocabulary. This is coming new, and prescriptive lists of vocabulary that our pupils, our young learners, have to learn in readiness for their GCSE exam. And there's a problem there because the list is not inclusive, right? So we require a more expansive list that empowers our pupils with protected characteristics to be able to describe themselves, their identity, their experiences of the world, their knowledges and values their knowledges, right? We require revision of the prescribed Key Stage 5 texts, so that we have texts that are written by Black and global majority authors that speak to experiences, perspectives, and accomplishments. And in the final, well, for starters, but also we need an assessment system that captures the strengths of our diverse community of young linguists. So we have the most recent school census carried out by the DFE, which tells us 20% of pupils whose first language is known or believed to be other than English. However, and our classrooms, as Erin points out, increasingly multilingual, multicultural, but we only have 19 languages at GCSE that are available in England. And of note, actually, none of them, there are no languages that are Indigenous African languages. So no Yoruba, no Hausa. These languages are extremely widely spoken. We require a more expansive list of accredited languages to reflect and celebrate multilingual diversities of our society. Just final point before I hand over to Jo now on this curriculum and assessment review is that one thing that was really that's come out of discussions around this is that many of our concerns and priorities were echoed by the Institute for Languages, Cultures and Societies at your school, at the School of Advanced Studies, in their submission for this review. And it's that kind of coordination and coordinated response, right, which is exactly what we require in order to prompt advancements in this area. So with that, I will stop talking and hand over to Jo. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Lisa. That really sets up well, yeah, for what I'm going to say, which you've gone into a lot of detail there, which and presented a lot of the evidence, which is really fantastic. I think really just a couple of points today from the perspective of a researcher who's working in languages and cultures. And I suppose I'm a researcher who works in languages and cultures at the Institute for Languages, Cultures and Society. So I'm not necessarily representative of someone working in the everyday teaching environment of a university. And I appreciate some things I might say, might get the response of when are we going to get the time to do that, or and I think that's fair enough. Let's have a conversation about that. I think what I want to do more fundamentally is kind of echo some of the conversations I've been having with colleagues here present. So colleagues such as Lisa, Ro, and my colleague Naomi Wells, who I see is on the call, and who is co-supervising the project with myself and Lisa that Ro is conducting, and we'll hear a bit more about Ro's project in a minute. I also wanted to refer back, thinking of the gaps, I want to refer back to what Lisa said in relation to her own work and how that has inspired us to put this PhD project together that Ro has so brilliantly taken up. And I think I'll say a bit more about how that came about in a minute, but I just wanted to put on record that Lisa has been one of the few people to actually start filling that gap in the research, and so really grateful to Lisa, for doing that and to starting us off today. I think talking to colleagues, Lisa also mentioned the curriculum review, and this became quite apparent to us, I think, when we were given this task of completing the curriculum review and talking to colleagues. Again, some of whom are here present. I can see Charlotte in the room. We're saying this needs to be evidence informed. We need to be able to, not only do we need to be able to put our voice forward, or teachers putting their voice forward, but I think particularly from the point of view of academics, it was said that we need evidence to show these people, to show these policymakers that change is warranted. And as Lisa's already said, the evidence is there, but I think there are gaps. And what we find, and what I found when putting that response, or some of that response, together with colleagues, was that there really was it really was a challenge to find some of that evidence. And I think really what myself and Naomi have been talking about a lot is, where do we need to change as researchers in languages and cultures, particularly when it comes to the application of our research, and indeed where we might need to take up more opportunities to work with colleagues across education and in the teaching profession, very much in a mode of collaborative research, which is how I see us working with the SIG, as Lisa's mentioned, but also on Ro's project, as a collaboration, as producing a kind of really in a mode, I think, that is quite old-fashioned now, and it hasn't even been mentioned, the word today, which is fantastic, around outreach. So moving away from this really quite patronizing language of outreach, which we used to talk about in universities, and probably still gets talked about in some universities in this country, which I might add tends to get put on early career researchers, teaching focused colleagues in universities with heavier workloads, who are paid much less than so-called research active colleagues, and it perpetuates that division. That's my experience where I've worked, at least. So I suppose what I'm saying here is that some of the fundamental assumptions and language we use when it comes to engagement with colleagues and pupils in schools needs to change. And I'm very much speaking from the university position, and it needs to do so urgently if we're to be seen as serious partners in the work that is, and I stress, already happening, as we've heard, within spaces like the SIG, led by brilliant teachers, teacher educators, and researchers like Lisa, Ro, Erin, as we've heard from, and many others. And what I've learned by going to the SIG over a good while now is that teachers don't actually need academics to do this work. They, I think, would very much welcome our involvement, our support when it comes to hosting, thinking about funding initiatives, certainly the intellectual collaboration. But we're talking about extremely well-informed and driven colleagues who are already experts in their subjects, and they don't need us. And we need them more than they need us to ensure the pipeline and the survival of the discipline as pupils come through that pipeline potentially into higher education. So with that question of the pipeline in mind, I just wanted to briefly talk about the kind of two extremely positive experiences that I've had with the SIG, the genesis of Ro's brilliant project, which is funded by an HRC Collaborative Doctoral Award, which was a competitive award, which Ro interviewed for and you know, wonderfully proposed to take on this project in the way that she has so brilliantly. And another project I've been working on, which is a little bit of an aside, but the more I think about it, I think it's important for thinking about the kinds of decolonial work that we might want to do or be involved in without necessarily mentioning the word decolonial. And perhaps we can come back to that question raised by Lisa around how that language operates within a particular space to, let's say, cover over other terms and other language. So perhaps we could come back to that in the discussion, I think. It's telling, I think, you know, really the initiative that I've been involved in with another colleague, a colleague who's a writer and a theatre maker and who's working in primary schools, and my colleague Nila Dolestelova, in my view, it's very much a project that does the work of decolonizing it, or rather it sees doing the work as the priority over talking about it. And as we all know, academics are very good at talking. Teachers and the colleagues we've worked with as part of the SIG are actually those people doing the work day in, day out. And we mustn't forget that it's really their commitment and energy that's pushing this work forwards. Just on that question, I wanted to kind of go into the work very briefly with a primary school in East London that I've been working on with Nila Dolestelova, theatre maker, writer, and the project's called 1,000 Words for Belonging. And it's originally conceived in the context, so it's quite a long-running project in the context of the recovery from the pandemic and the multiple lockdowns, which, as we know, led to mass school closures. And pupils within a set of selected classes, pupils were invited to explore the language of emotion through a multilingual perspective. These are pupils in, I think it was year 4 and year 5 of primary school, in their own languages, in translation, in British Sign Language. And this led to students writing their own multilingual poems and stories, which were then recorded by professional actors and played back to them in special sessions on film. Since then, Nila's won Arts Council England funding to take up a residency in the school and then work with year 6 students to create 3 multilingual mosaics, which are displayed at the school across Redbridge, including Gants Hill Public Library. The latest iteration of that project has led to a podcast, which is coming soon, it's currently being edited, on multilingual education, the power of multilingual education in schools, and also a multilingual published book called 100 Poems for Belonging, which was co-authored by the students of year 6 and curated by Nila. So a few things to say about this. One, this is a school with, and I'm thinking about Lisa's point here about 20% nationally of our pupils having English as a second language. This is a school with in excess of 80% of pupils with a first language other than English. And they've seen notable improvements in academic performance across other subjects where pupils have been involved in these multilingual creative language projects. Through the connections that me and Nila had with the ALL SIG, myself and Nila wrote an article about the school for the magazine Languages Today, and in particular how the school has been doing its own research as a result of Nila's project that shows how those pupils who are involved in multilingual activities, of those pupils that are involved in multilingual activities, 90% were set to achieve the national standard in writing as compared with lower levels across the other classes that were not kind of intervention classes. Second, the languages subject community increasingly recognises that primary school is the place to reach pupils, to get them excited, motivated about languages. whether those languages are the languages they're speaking at home or languages and cultures they wish to learn about from an early age. And again, I very much take Lisa's point about the limitations of the GCSE when those pupils get to the stage where they could possibly take a GCSE in their language, they're often held back by those structural factors. Third, the research gap I mentioned already, and that myself and Lisa, Ro, and Naomi have been talking about a lot, is about having the data that we wanted to submit to the government curriculum review and to lobby, therefore, for more funding for languages. I think that is partially filled by a project like NELA's, which goes way beyond what we would have referred to in the past as outreach. And it's research. And I think that's what we need to be doing more of as academics within institutions. It's recognizing where those collaborations can really work. Yes, they take a long time to set up. It's about building relationships. But precisely through the SIG, I think this is where those kinds of connections can emerge. Ro, you're going to say more about your project in a minute. I just wanted to say the kind of second area, which has been incredibly inspiring for me, is and has started to fill, or continued rather, to fill those gaps in research around race, racism, and cultural learning, all of which Lisa's referred to. I think when myself and Naomi put the project together for Ro's CDA for the Collaborative Doctoral Award, we knew questions would be raised about our expertise in education. And really that is where the SIG came in, and the connection with Lisa and Melina's presentation, which we became very aware of as it had been recorded, and then Lisa's work. So I think bringing Lisa on board as a teacher educator, and as a researcher within education was really crucial to us getting that bid. And this very much came out of, as I said, those connections with the SIG. And since then, Ro, as we'll hear, has really made that project into her own. And I think it's really allowed, myself and Naomi as academics working in languages and cultures department to think about where the discipline needs to go next. Yes, I think, Lisa, you cited our director's words around the need for a strategic coordinated response. I think we all completely agree there. But I think longer term, it's about thinking of the kinds of work that academics have become used to doing within universities, and perhaps thinking about shifting the landscape, thinking about why do we not interact more with researchers within education studies, such as yourself, Lisa, and that we have been doing through this co-supervision, through this project, as we're about to hear from Ro about. So with that, I'll hand over to Ro. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. I'll just quickly share my screen. There you go. Okay, so just make sure that is lovely. Okay, so I'd like to start off with education is never neutral, and I'm coming to you as an ex-teacher, disillusioned teacher, and now academic. So education is never neutral. It either supports suppression or becomes a tool for liberation. A truly diverse curriculum must center abolitionist and Black feminist thought, fostering classrooms that reject oppression and promote freedom. My research, Awakening Critical Consciousness and Linguistic Liberation, examines how teaching modern foreign languages shapes students' understandings of themselves and the world. Decolonizing education requires schools and universities to challenge the curricula that erases marginalized histories and prioritizes whiteness instead of amplifying voices that have historically been marginalized and silenced. And by whiteness, I'm not talking about skin color, I'm talking about the systems of repression that are in place. The dominance of English and other European languages, I'll take French and Spanish for example, is rooted in colonial violence, erasing histories and marginalizing non-European perspectives. Teaching these languages without addressing their colonial past denies students the power of multilingual identities and perpetuates Eurocentric thinking. As Dr. Willoughby Herod notes, the racial logic of white vulnerability hides these power structures, privileging white knowledge whilst sidelining Black and Indigenous contributions. This exclusion begins in schools and continues into higher education. Higher education magnifies inequalities found in schools, and although 24% of undergraduates come from the global majority, only 17% go on to postgraduate research. For Black students, the barriers are even higher, shaped by financial hardship, racism, and a lack of support. If we look at SOAS, for example, they show us what is possible when students demand change. They challenge the colonial roots of Western philosophers, whilst also pushing for the inclusion of non-European thought. This is a model for schools, universities to collaborate, creating curricula that recognizes colonial histories and celebrates multilingualism. Decolonization is not just about adding new voices and ticking boxes, it's about transforming the very structure of education. And as Bell Hooks teaches us, education should be about freedom and collective change. In English, the literary canon must be dismantled. Black feminist thought shows us that privileging whiteness limits our understanding of literature's power. Decolonizing English means bringing in voices from the Global South and Indigenous authors. In MFL, we need to teach European languages alongside their colonial contexts. Students must learn to reclaim these languages, using them as a tool for resistance. Schools can help by introducing multilingual projects that build critical thinking, and this foundation will help students engage with abolitionist ideas as they move into higher education. To dismantle oppression, we must create new systems. We must radically reimagine. Collaboration between schools and universities can turn the classroom into a space of care, creativity, and collective freedom. Artivism, therefore, could offer a path forward. Students can use art to critique colonial histories, create multilingual projects, and imagine futures without oppression. This connects school-level learning with the abolitionist practices found in higher education, empowering students to challenge the systems that seek to erase them. So creating a diverse curriculum means rejecting the status quo. Schools and universities must work together to, firstly, decenter whiteness and elevate marginalized voices in English as well as MFL. Secondly, challenge colonial narratives and encourage multilingual engagement. And thirdly, use abolitionist practices to dismantle systems of harm and build spaces of care and freedom. Decolonization is not just a one-time event, it is a process. It asks us to confront history, disrupt the present, and create a future where all students are central in the curriculum, not just footnotes. The classroom should be a site of liberation, where the just world we dream of begins to take shape. And I'd like to leave a final quote, which is, "A diverse curriculum is a rejection of erasure and a call to build something radically new." Collaboration between schools and higher education is necessary for decolonization to succeed, turning the classroom into a space of resistance, radical imagination, and freedom. And I'd like to leave just an image that my students created. Well, students, the young people in our collaborative group that I've taken under my wing, and they left me with this, and I just wanted to share it. And resources are also available for you. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ro. That was a lovely way to kind of round things off. It was really wonderful and so kind of clear in that kind of call to action. Thank you. And thank you to Jo and Lisa as well for your contributions too. It's been really stimulating. I'm going to imagine there's quite a few thoughts, reflections, questions. So we're a kind of small enough group, I think. Annie, can we stop recording now? Great. Okay. I'll just wait for